The sun didn't rise that morning. It roared. It burned through the sky like a judgment, spilling gold and white heat over the cracked basin of Arizona territory. Buzzards circled high above, casting crooked shadows that passed like ghosts over the silent sand. And in the center of it all, where the wind dared not whisper and the sagebrush stood brittle with death, she lay. Etta Ray's wrists were torn raw from the iron shackles that held her to a bleached wooden post. Her dress, once a soft green, was now stiff with blood and salt. Her lips were cracked, face blistered, eyes half closed beneath the cruel press of sun. 3 days, no food, no water, no mercy. She hadn't screamed after the first night, not when the coyotes came sniffing, not when her skin began to blister and peel, not even when the wind blew hard enough to sting sand into her wounds. There was something in her still, some quiet fire that refused to give the men who left her here the satisfaction of her begging. She didn't think of them anymore. She thought only of water, of shade, of the taste of oranges she once stole, as a child in Galveston, of her brother's face before the fever took him, and of the woman she'd tried to be, quiet, diligent, proper, even in a world that never looked her fully in the eye. By the time the rider appeared, she didn't know if he was real or one more vision sent to torment her before the end. The mirage shimmered with heat, bending his form like smoke. Horse, hat, saddlebag, a glint of metal. Lyle McCrae pulled his horse to a halt on the ridge, eyes narrowing against the sun. He wasn't much to look at, gaunt, wind-bitten, with a coat that had seen better days and a beard that made him seem older than he was. He hadn't come to save anyone. He'd come tracking a lost colt. But the movement down by the arroyo caught his eye. He dismounted carefully, rifle in hand, boots, crunching dry earth. Vultures scattered with angry caws as he approached. He thought it might be a corpse at first, until he saw the shallow rise of her chest. She was alive, barely. The chains were rusted, old, cruel in their simplicity. Lyle said nothing at first. He just knelt, poured a single capful of water from his canteen, and touched it to her lips. She didn't flinch, didn't thank him. She only opened her eyes, slow, deliberate, and met his. They were dark, not with fear, but with something heavier. He stood quickly, looking around. This wasn't random. This was punishment. A message. He pulled at the chain. No use. He drew a knife from his boot and sawed at the weakened bolt until it gave with a harsh snap. Her arms dropped like broken branches. She didn't cry out. "You'll die out here," he muttered, more to himself than her. Then he lifted her, light as driftwood, and slung her across the saddle. She didn't struggle, just let the world sway around her as the horse carried them east, toward the hills, away from the men who had left her to burn. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. When she lost consciousness again, he whispered, "Don't die, not on me." The wind picked up behind them, curling dust into strange, whirling shapes. On the canyon rim above, a figure watched from the shade of a boulder, tall, unmoving. His skin the color of red earth, hair braided with feathers, a longbow resting across his back. His eyes followed them, not with curiosity, but with caution. And something else. Memory, perhaps. Lyle's ranch sat tucked in a dry bowl between two rocky hills, surrounded by scrubland and low fences that leaned more from wind than age. No wife waited for him, no sons, no workers. Just silence, broken only by the soft bray of a stubborn mule and the creak of an empty porch swing. He laid Etta on a cot inside the one-room cabin, the air cool and dim despite the outside heat. He brought water in a tin cup and a cloth soaked from the rain barrel. For hours, she didn't stir, but she breathed. That was something. He didn't ask questions. Not even when he removed what was left of the chains, or when he saw the scars across her back, old familiar marks that made his chest ache. Instead, he boiled beans, poured broth, and left it near the bed with a tin spoon. 3 days passed. She didn't speak, but she watched him, eyes following every movement. She accepted the water, the food, even the spare blanket he left beside her. One evening, as the sky bled pink over the ridge, she sat up, slowly, her limbs shaking. She said nothing, but walked to the open doorway and stood on the porch. Lyle sat nearby, whittling. He didn't look up. "You don't ask me what happened," she said. Her voice was hoarse, rusted from thirst and silence. He shrugged. "You talk when you're ready. Or don't." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, almost imperceptibly, and lowered herself onto the porch step. She watched the sky without blinking, the way someone does when they're afraid to close their eyes. Lyle didn't press her. He just handed her a warm cup of coffee and returned to his carving. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind that had weight. A quiet built on loss, on things unspoken. Later that night, while Lyle was stoking the fire, she asked softly, "Why'd you help me?" He didn't look up. "Didn't seem right, you being left like that." "I could be a killer," she said. "You could." He poked at the coals. "But I don't think you are." Silence again. But something had shifted. The air between them no longer felt like walking through ash. By morning, Etta was sweeping the dust from the front porch, slowly, but with purpose. Lyle watched her through the window and said nothing. He didn't know her story yet, didn't need to. He'd seen enough of the world to know when someone was running from something worse than the desert. But someone else was watching too. Uppy. On the ridge, near where the buzzards had once circled, the silent figure remained, still as a shadow. Eyes on the homestead, waiting. And not far behind him, in a saloon 2 towns over, a ranch hand was whispering to a drunken crowd. "She ain't dead. The half-blood made it out, and some fool rancher took her in." The men at the table leaned in, grins sharpening, bottles clinking. The desert, after all, never forgets, and it never forgives quietly. To be continued. Night came fast after the gunfire, dragging silence behind it like a long black veil. The wounded man bled into the dust, too proud to beg, too stubborn to die quick. Lyle said nothing, just stood over him, eyes cold. Etta turned away. Some things didn't need witnessing again. They buried the 2 dead where the yuccas grew crooked, far enough from the cabin to keep the scent down. The wounded one, Lyle tied to his own horse and sent riding west with half a canteen and a warning. "Don't look back, don't come back." He didn't. By the time the stars came out, the wind had changed again, softer now, like the desert itself was letting out a breath it had held too long. Etta sat on the porch steps, shotgun leaning beside her. Lyle brought her a blanket. She took it without a word and wrapped it around her shoulders. He came again. "She said quietly. Lyle nodded, eyes scanning the ridge where the arrow had flown from. "I saw." "Who is he?" "Don't know." They didn't speak after that, but something passed between them, heavier than fear, lighter than hope. The next morning, tracks led down from the ridge. Not boots, moccasins, clean, deliberate. Whoever the stranger was, he'd been close. Close enough to watch. Close enough to choose not to kill. Later that week, Lyle found a bundle wrapped in deer hide left on the edge of his field. Dried meat, wild herbs, and a small, carved token. Shaped like a bird. No name, no sign. Just the quiet language of a man who lived on the edges of things. Etta held the token in her palm. "He saved my life." Lyle studied her face. "Why do you think he cares?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Because I'm still here." That night, she dreamed of the desert. Not the burning, not the chains, just wide skies, soft winds, a horse running free along the ridge. She woke with tears on her cheeks and didn't wipe them away. Days stretched into weeks. The wounds on her skin faded. The ones inside did not. But she worked harder now, with purpose. Tending the animals, cleaning the tools, repairing what she could. Every corner of the house slowly bore her touch. Small changes, like warmth seeping into cold walls. Lyle watched her without intruding. Once he caught her standing in the doorway, hand pressed to the frame. She looked back at him and said, "It doesn't feel like a cage anymore." One evening, thunder rolled in from the south. Storms were rare that time of year, but not impossible. They worked fast to bring the animals under shelter. The wind tore across the plains, full of grit and ghosts. As they pulled the last of the feed barrels inside, a figure appeared on the horizon. Etta froze. Lyle reached for his rifle. But the figure raised a hand. Not in threat, in peace. The stranger came closer, cloak billowing behind him like a shadow. His face was lined, painted in simple patterns, eyes like river stones, still unreadable. He stood just outside the barn, the storm wind howling around him, and spoke. "You have fought well. You have bled for your ground." His voice was quiet thunder, deep with years. Lyle stepped forward. "Why'd you help us?" The man turned to Etta. "Because she was not meant to die in chains." Her eyes glistened, but she held them open. "Why watch and not speak?" He looked up at the sky. "Some stories must be chosen, not given. I waited to see what you would make of yours." A silence stretched. Then he pulled something from his coat. A strip of cloth, blackened with soot. "I took this from the fire they left behind," he said. "You were not meant to return, yet here you are." Etta reached out and took it. It was part of the shirt she'd worn, the one burned into her back and memory. She held it for a moment, then let it fall into the dirt. "You have a name?" Lyle asked. The man didn't answer. He just looked toward the desert and said, "When the land calls again, I will return." Then he was gone, into the wind and shadow, swallowed by the storm's edge. Rain came hard that night. The roof held, mostly. Etta stood in the doorway and let the water touch her face, washing salt and soot from her skin. Inside, Lyle lit a fire and made coffee. She came in dripping, shivering, but smiling faintly. He handed her a cup. "Still thinking of running?" She shook her head. "There's nothing left out there for me, only ghosts." They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Lyle glanced at her. "You know, this place wasn't always meant to be a home. I built it just to stay out of sight. I didn't expect company." She looked around, then back at him. "You ever wonder if maybe that's what it needed to become one?" He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee. Later she laid the carved bird on the mantel, not as a symbol of the man who'd saved her, but of the fact that someone had seen her, really seen her, and decided she was worth saving. Weeks turned to months. Spring broke over the land like a long-held breath. The wounds inside her didn't vanish, but they dulled, like old scars, tender but no longer bleeding. She learned to laugh again, though softly. Lyle didn't ask for more. One morning she found a leather-bound notebook in the drawer of the desk, half full, pages yellowing. Lyle looked sheepish. "Used to write. Before." "Why'd you stop?" "Didn't think anyone would read it." She smiled. "Maybe it's time to start again." And so he did. And she did. Not with perfect peace, not with some fairy tale ending, but with something better. Choice. Shared silence. Small things built with calloused hands. One night, beneath the moon, Etta whispered, "I wasn't looking to be saved." Lyle touched her hand gently. Neither was I. And in that stillness, they both understood. Salvation hadn't come as rescue. It had come as recognition, as choosing each other, day after day, in a world that rarely offered second chances. The chains that once held her had long since rusted away. What remained was the life she chose to step into, and the man who stood quietly beside her, ready to build it, one tender moment at a time. Call to action. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, redemption, and quiet strength from the heart of the frontier. Lyle wasn't used to waking up with someone else's breath in the room, but hers was soft, barely there, like the hush of wind through mesquite. He didn't look over at first, just listened, counted heartbeats. It was the kind of morning that felt too still, like something was waiting to happen. She stirred. Not a word, just the creak of the cot frame and the sound of cloth slipping from skin. When he finally glanced over, she was already dressed, boots laced, hair tied back, eyes wide open. "Morning," he said. Etta nodded, but didn't smile. "Cattle are low on water. I'll get the pump going. I already checked the lines. They're fine." She walked past him and out the door without waiting for a reply. Lyle sat there a moment, staring at the floor. She worked hard, harder than she should have, considering the burns on her back hadn't fully healed. But there was something else. She wasn't just trying to help. She was trying to prove she belonged. By the time he stepped outside, she'd moved on to mending the Ayish corral fence, hammering a broken rail into place with stiff, practiced swings. He watched her from the porch, shoulders tense, jaw tight, eyes sharp and distant like she was always expecting someone to come riding out of the horizon with a noose. "You don't have to fix everything," he said. "I know." She didn't. "Stop working. You can rest. Ain't no shame in that." She looked up then, finally, squinting at him beneath her brow. "You rest when you feel safe." Lyle didn't argue, just nodded and walked to the barn, hands in his pockets. That afternoon, the dog started barking. Lyle stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, before the second bark left its throat. Etta appeared beside him, silent and sure. Together they watched as a horse came into view, rider hunched low. By the time the man reached the gate, his coat was dust-crusted and soaked in blood at the shoulder. He dismounted slowly, swaying, and held up a hand. "I ain't looking for trouble," he croaked. Lyle lowered the rifle slightly. "Then what are you looking for?" The man pointed to his wound. "Help." They brought him inside and laid him out on the kitchen table. Etta fetched clean rags while Lyle poured boiling water into a chipped basin. The bullet had gone clean through, but the bleeding hadn't stopped. Etta held the man down while Lyle worked the wound. When it was done, she washed the blood from her hands in the sink, arms trembling. "I've seen him before," she said quietly. "Back when I was owned." Lyle looked up from the bandage. "He one of them?" She shook her head. "No. He helped me once. Slipped me food when no one was watching. Paid for it too. Got whipped and left outside for 2 days." Lyle looked down at the stranger, his face pale, lips cracked. "You think he came here by accident?" "No. I think he ran out of places to go." They sat at the table while the man slept, listening to the wind rattle the windows. Outside, the sky was turning copper, the kind of color that meant heat lightning and long nights. "You still think no one's looking for you?" Lyle asked. Etta didn't answer right away. I think someone's always looking. But now, they're looking for someone who doesn't exist anymore. He studied her. What do you mean? She leaned forward, elbows on the table. I used to be property. Then I was prey. Now, I'm just tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. But most of all, I'm tired of feeling like I don't deserve to stop. You do, he said. The silence after was full of something heavier than grief, something like belief, stretched thin but still holding. When the wounded man finally woke, it was dark. He blinked at the lamplight and groaned, trying to sit. Don't, Etta said, steady but kind.